He texted, "X broke my right leg," to the wrong number. Minutes later, Mafia Alpha came to his door. Blood on the linoleum. Bone grating against bone. When Derek's boyfriend snapped his tibia, his first instinct was survival. Through a haze of blinding agony, he grabbed his phone, typing a desperate plea to his brother. "He broke my. Please help me." He hit send, praying for a lifeline. But the phone vibrated with a reply from an unknown number. 3 words that stopped the breath in his throat. "Give me his name and your address." The linoleum floor was freezing against Derek's cheek. It smelled of cheap lemon cleaner and old grease. He didn't move. Moving meant acknowledging the fire burning through his right leg just below the knee. The angle was wrong, a terrible, unnatural geometry that made his stomach heave violently. The front door slammed, rattling the cheap apartment walls and sending a fresh wave of agony up his thigh. Marcus was gone. He always left after it got this bad. Called it giving Derek space to cool down, a twisted rewriting of reality where Derek bleeding on the floor was somehow an aggressive act against him. Derek dragged in a breath. It hitched, catching on a sob he refused to let out. He needed his phone. It was on the coffee table, 3 feet away. 3 feet might as well have been 3 miles. He gritted his teeth, tasting copper, and dug his elbows into the floor. He dragged his upper body forward, his right leg trailing behind him like dead weight. The friction of his jeans against the floor sent a jagged spike of nausea straight to his brain. His vision tunneled, the edges turning a fuzzy static gray. "Don't pass out." "Not yet." His hands slapped against the laminate wood of the coffee table. His fingers scrabbled for the device, knocking over a half-empty beer bottle. It shattered. He didn't care. He pulled the phone down to the floor, his hands shaking violently. Adrenaline was leaving his system, replaced by cold, crushing shock. He opened his messages. His vision was swimming, the letters blurring together. He needed his brother, Evan. Evan lived 20 minutes away. Evan had a car. Derek's thumb smeared blood across the screen as he typed a number from memory. He was too panicked to search his contacts, just the area code and the 7 digits he had dialed 1,000 times. "He broke my leg. Please help me." He hit send. The blue bubble appeared. Derek let his head drop back to the floor, panting. His chest heaved. The silence in the apartment was deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. He watched the screen. Delivered. Seconds ticked by. The pain in his leg was evolving from a sharp shock into a deep throbbing ache that synced with his pulse. He waited for the 3 gray dots. Evan was always on his phone. He would reply instantly. He would call. 1 minute. 2. The phone vibrated. Derek snatched it up, squinting at the screen. The reply wasn't from Evan. There was no contact name, just a string of digits. Derek stared at the top of the screen. He had swapped the last 2 numbers. He read the text. "Unknown, who is this?" Panic clawed at his throat. He had texted a stranger. He was bleeding, broken on the floor, and Marcus would be back within the hour. Marcus always came back. He would bring a bag of frozen peas, cry, and tell Derek how he pushed him too far. If he was still on the floor when Marcus returned, he would realize Derek was actually hurt. He would panic. And when Marcus panicked, things got worse. Derek's fingers flew across the keyboard, clumsy and frantic. "Derek, I'm sorry. Wrong number." He moved to delete the thread, to try Evan again. The phone buzzed in his hand before he could. "Unknown, you said someone broke your leg." "Derek, it's a mistake. Please ignore." "Unknown, are you safe right now?" Derek stared at the glaring white text. A hysterical, choking laugh bubbled up in his throat. Was he safe? He was lying in a puddle of spilled beer and his own blood, nursing a snapped tibia, waiting for his abuser to return. Derek, no. He didn't know why he typed it. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the profound, isolating loneliness of the apartment. He was so tired of lying. The 3 gray dots appeared immediately. They vanished. Appeared again. Then a single message came through. Unknown, give me his name and your address. Derek froze. The tone of the text wasn't concerned. It wasn't a 911 dispatcher trying to calm a victim. It read like a demand. Cold. Factual. Derek, who are you? Unknown, someone who hates a bully. The address now. A shadow passed over the apartment window. Marcus, he was pacing outside the building. He wasn't leaving. He was working up the nerve to come back upstairs. Derek's breath hitched. He looked at the door, then back at his phone. If he called the police, Marcus would hear the sirens. He would kill Derek before they made it up the stairs. He had nothing left to lose. His fingers trembled as he typed. Derek, 214 Cedar Street. Apartment 4B. His name is Marcus. The phone went dark. No reply. Derek lay his head down on his arms, squeezing his eyes shut. The pain was unbearable now. He was an idiot. He had given his address to a complete stranger. It was probably a teenager playing a prank or some creep who got off on the drama. Nobody was coming. He was entirely alone. Then he heard it, the heavy, rhythmic thud of Marcus's boots coming up the stairwell. The doorknob rattled. Derek held his breath, pressing himself as flat against the floor as possible. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a dull thwack. Marcus stepped inside. He was a broad alpha, wearing a faded mechanic's shirt, his knuckles bruised red from where they had connected with Derek's jaw before he kicked his legs out from under him. He held a plastic bag from the convenience store across the street. He looked down at Derek, his face crumpling into a mask of pathetic, manufactured guilt. "Why are you still on the floor?" he murmured, stepping over the shattered beer bottle. "Come on, get up." "I can't," Derek whispered. His voice was entirely devoid of emotion. Marcus sighed, a sharp sound of irritation breaking through the fake remorse. "Don't be dramatic. I barely clipped you. Look, I brought ice." He tossed the bag of frozen peas onto the sofa. "Get up. You're getting blood on the rug." "My leg is broken, Marcus." He stopped. His eyes darted to Derek's right leg, noting the unnatural bend beneath the denim. The color drained from his face, replaced instantly by panic. And then, as Derek knew it would, the panic hardened into rage. "You're lying," Marcus snapped, taking a step toward him. "You just want to make me look like the bad guy. You pushed me, Derek. You were screaming at me. What was I supposed to do?" He reached down, grabbing Derek by the bicep, and yanked upward. Derek screamed. It tore from his throat, a raw, primal sound that echoed off the thin walls. Agony in his leg flared so brightly he saw sparks behind his eyes. "Shut up!" Marcus hissed, dropping his arm. He looked frantically toward the door. "Shut the fuck up. The neighbors will hear." Before Derek could catch his breath, 3 sharp knocks sounded at the door. Marcus froze. He looked at the door, then down at Derek. "Did you call the cops?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a sudden, violent intensity. "No," Derek gasped, clutching his leg. "No, I swear." The knock came again. Not frantic. Not police. Just a measured, heavy sound. Stay quiet, Marcus ordered, pointing a trembling finger at him. He walked to the door, peering through the peephole. He frowned, pulling back. He hesitated, then unlatched the chain and opened the door a fraction of an inch. Yeah. What do you? The door exploded inward. Marcus was thrown backward, crashing into the drywall. The wood of the door splintered as a massive alpha in a dark suit stepped through. He moved with terrifying speed, grabbing Marcus by the throat and slamming him against the wall, lifting him completely off his feet. Marcus choked, his legs kicking wildly in the air. The alpha holding him didn't say a word, he just pinned him there, completely unbothered by the frantic thrashing. Then a second alpha walked into the apartment. Derek's breath caught. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than Derek made in a year. His shoes made no sound on the cheap laminate floor. He had dark hair, a sharp jawline, and eyes that were completely, chillingly hollow. He surveyed the apartment with mild distaste, like he had stepped into something unpleasant on the sidewalk. His gaze drifted to the blood, the shattered glass, and finally to Derek on the floor. He didn't rush to him. He didn't gasp or offer soothing words. He just walked over, his hands resting in his pockets, and looked down at Derek's bent leg. "Derek," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that somehow cut through the ringing in Derek's ears. "Who?" Derek swallowed hard. "Who are you?" "Sebastian Kane." He pulled a phone from his pocket, an exact match to the one Derek had been texting, and placed it on the coffee table. "You type very fast under pressure." Derek stared at the phone. He looked up at the alpha. Sebastian Kane didn't look like a savior. He looked like an executioner. Sebastian turned his attention to Marcus, who was turning purple against the wall, pinned by the larger alpha. "Samson," Sebastian said quietly. "Put him down. Let him breathe." Samson dropped Marcus. Marcus hit the floor, gasping and hacking, clutching his throat. He looked up at Sebastian, terror in his eyes. "Who the fuck are you?" Marcus croaked, trying to push himself backward. "You can't just break in here. I'll call the cops." Sebastian crouched down, bringing himself to Marcus's eye level. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man examining a very uninteresting bug. "Marcus," Sebastian said. "You broke his leg." "It was an accident," Marcus squeaked, backing into the corner. "He tripped. We were just arguing, and he tripped." Sebastian sighed softly. He reached out and grasped Marcus's right hand. Marcus flinched but didn't pull away, too terrified to move. Sebastian inspected his bruised knuckles. "You strike me as a man who lies very often and very poorly," Sebastian said. Before Marcus could process the words, Sebastian twisted his wrist. It wasn't a fast, brutal snap, it was a slow, deliberate application of pressure. Marcus shrieked as the bones in his wrist separated, a sickening popping sound echoing in the small room. Sebastian let go, standing up and wiping his hand with a linen handkerchief he pulled from his pocket. Marcus was rolling on the floor, cradling his ruined wrist, sobbing hysterically. "An accident," Sebastian murmured. "Just like that." He turned back to Derek. Derek was pressing himself into the floorboards, terrified. He had traded a domestic abuser for a monster. Sebastian saw the fear in his eyes. His expression didn't soften, but he crouched down beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "I am not going to hurt you," he stated, a simple declaration of fact. "My medical team is in the hallway. They are going to splint your leg and carry you out of here. It will hurt. But you are leaving this apartment, and you are never coming back." Derek looked at him, his chest heaving. Why, he managed to whisper. I don't even know you. A happy accident, Sebastian replied. His dark eyes finally locked onto Derek's. I detest alphas who hit omegas. And I had a free evening. The man who entered next carried a black medical bag. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, and moved with the same quiet efficiency as Samson and Sebastian. This is Dr. Miller, Sebastian said, stepping back to give the man room. He is discreet. Do exactly as he says. Dr. Miller knelt beside Derek. He didn't offer a patronizing smile, he just opened his bag and pulled out a pair of heavy shears. I need to cut the denim, Derek, Miller said, his voice brisk and professional. This is going to sting. He sliced through the fabric of Derek's jeans, peeling it back to expose the swollen, purple flesh of his shin. Derek hissed through his teeth, his fingers digging into the floorboards. The skin was taut and shiny, the bone pressing dangerously close to the surface. Clean break, but the displacement is severe, Miller muttered, glancing up at Sebastian. He needs an oar. I can stabilize it for transport, but we need to move him now. Sebastian nodded once. He turned his attention back to the corner of the room. Marcus was whimpering, curled into a fetal position, clutching his broken wrist. The false bravado was entirely gone, he was a puddle of pathetic, terrified sweat. Sebastian walked over and stood above him. He didn't kick him. He didn't yell. The silence he commanded was far more oppressive. Marcus, Sebastian said. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head. Please, I didn't mean it, please don't kill me. I am not going to kill you, Sebastian replied. The relief that washed over Marcus's face was instant. But it died just as quickly when Sebastian continued, death is a release. You don't get a release. You get consequences. Sebastian looked at Samson, who was standing by the ruined door. Take him to the warehouse. Call Elias. Tell him I have a project for him, a man who needs to learn how to walk without functioning kneecaps. Marcus screamed, a high, reedy sound of absolute panic. No! You can't do this. You're crazy. Samson grabbed Marcus by the scruff of his neck, hauling him up. Marcus thrashed, kicking his legs, but Samson dragged him out the door with zero effort, ignoring his pleas. The sound of Marcus's screams faded down the stairwell, eventually silenced by the heavy thud of the building's front door. Derek watched it happen through a blur of pain. His mind was misfiring, trying to process the casual orchestration of violence. Hold him down, Miller instructed. Derek snapped his attention back to the doctor. He was holding a traction splint. I have to align the bone before we put him on the stretcher, Miller warned Sebastian. He's going to fight it. Sebastian stepped forward. He crouched beside Derek's head. He didn't touch Derek's face or offer a hand to hold. He simply placed his heavy hands flat on Derek's shoulders, pinning him to the floor. Breathe in, Sebastian commanded. Derek drew a breath. Miller pulled the leg. Derek didn't just scream, his vision whited out entirely. The pain was a physical entity, a monstrous thing tearing through his nervous system. He arched off the floor, but Sebastian's hands were unyielding anchors, holding him down. A feral sound ripped from Derek's throat until he literally ran out of air. As quickly as it happened, it stopped. The bones slid back into a rough alignment, the blinding agony settling into a dull, throbbing roar. Derek gasped, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the dust on the floor. His entire body was shaking uncontrollably. Done, Miller said quickly, securing the splint. Let's get the board. Two more men appeared from the hallway, carrying a rigid transport board. They worked quickly, securing Derek with heavy straps. He felt detached from his own body, floating above the room, watching these men in expensive suits carry him out of his own apartment. As they lifted him, Derek looked at Sebastian. He was watching him intently. "Where are you taking me?" Derek slurred, the shock finally shutting down his cognitive functions. "Somewhere safe," Sebastian said, falling into step beside the stretcher as they carried him down the narrow, dimly lit stairs. "I don't have money," Derek whispered, his eyes heavy. "For the doctor. For the help. I can't pay you." The stretcher was loaded into the back of a massive black SUV idling in the alleyway. The interior smelled of expensive leather and antiseptic. Dr. Miller climbed in beside him, immediately hooking an four-line into his arm. Sebastian stood by the open back doors of the vehicle. The streetlights caught the sharp angles of his face. He looked at Derek, entirely unreadable. "I don't want your money, Derek," Sebastian said quietly. "Then what do you want?" The morphine from Miller's four hit Derek's bloodstream, a cold rush that began dragging him down into the dark. But before his eyes fluttered shut, he heard Sebastian's answer, a low promise over the rumble of the engine. "I want to see what happens when you finally stop bleeding on the floor." He shut the doors. Waking up was not a cinematic flutter of eyelashes. It was a slow, groaning crawl through a suffocating tar pit of narcotics. First came the sound, a rhythmic, quiet beep. It didn't belong in his apartment. His apartment sounded like traffic on wet asphalt and the rattle of a failing AC window unit. This sound was sterile. Steady. Then came the smell, bleach, expensive floral detergent, the sharp tang of iodine. And beneath it, something else. Something warm and dark and utterly foreign. It seeped into Derek's consciousness before his eyes even opened. An alpha scent. Potent. Overwhelming. It made his omega instinct stir in a way that was deeply unsettling. He forced his eyes open. The light was muted, filtering through heavy charcoal-gray blackout curtains that covered a massive window. He was staring at a ceiling painted in a soft matte white, no water stains, no cracks. He turned his head. It felt like moving a boulder. He was in a bed, a hospital bed, but framed in rich mahogany rather than cold metal. And four lines snaked from the back of his left hand up to a saline bag hanging from a chrome stand. To his right, a vitals monitor blinked softly. Memory rushed back in a violent, disorienting flood. The linoleum floor. Marcus's boots. The splintering door. Sebastian Kane's hollow eyes. The snap of Marcus's wrist. The traction splint. Derek gasped, his hands flying down to his right leg. He couldn't feel it. Panic, sharp and icy, spiked in his chest. He threw off the thick duvet. His right leg, from mid-thigh down to his toes, was encased in a heavy fiberglass cast. There was a thick surgical dressing peeking out from the top. "You have a titanium rod in your tibia." Derek flinched, snapping his head toward the corner of the room. Dr. Miller sat in a leather armchair under a soft reading lamp, reading a thick medical journal, his glasses pushed down his nose. He didn't look like a man who had participated in a home invasion. He looked like a bored suburban physician. He closed the journal and stood up, walking over to the bed. He checked the four-line, tapping the plastic tubing with a manicured fingernail. "The surgery took 4 hours," Miller stated, his tone entirely conversational. "Your boyfriend did a remarkable job pulverizing the bone. A simple cast wouldn't hold it. I had to use plates and screws to rebuild the structural integrity before inserting the intermedullary nail." Derek stared at him. The clinical terms washed over him, meaningless against the sheer terror of his situation. "Where am I?" he managed to croak. "You are a guest of Mr. Kane." "That doesn't answer my question." Miller offered a thin, humorless smile. "Geographically, you are 50 miles outside the city limits. Practically, you are in a secure medical wing of a private residence. You are safe. You are heavily medicated. And you are not to pull at that for. I want to leave. No. You don't. The voice came from the doorway. Derek looked past Dr. Miller. Sebastian stood there. He had changed out of the charcoal suit and was now wearing dark slacks and a black cashmere sweater with the sleeves pushed up. Without the suit jacket, he looked broader. More dangerous. He walked into the room. Miller immediately stepped back, deferring the space to him. Doctor, Sebastian said quietly. Give us the room. Miller nodded once and walked out, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind him. It latched with a solid, definitive click. Derek shrank back against the pillows. He felt incredibly small, swallowed by the massive bed, trapped by the heavy cast. Sebastian didn't approach the bed. He took the armchair Miller had vacated. He crossed his legs, resting his elbows on the armrests, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. He watched Derek. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The alpha scent, that dark, warm, oppressive presence, filled the room. Derek's omega instincts were screaming at him, a confusing mix of fear and something else he refused to name. His own scent, usually mild and unobtrusive, was spiking with anxiety, and he hated that Sebastian could smell it. Derek refused to look away, though holding Sebastian's gaze felt like staring into a vacuum. You are waiting for the other shoe to drop, Sebastian finally said. Usually, when men break down my door and kidnap me, there's a catch, Derek replied. His voice was raspy, but the cynicism was real. It was his only defense mechanism left. You were not kidnapped. You were extracted. A polite word for abduction. A factual word for removing a victim from a lethal environment, Sebastian corrected. He didn't raise his voice. He just stated the words as if they were gravity, inarguable. Marcus was going to kill you, Derek. If not last night, then next week. Next month. He broke your leg because you were leaving him. Correct? Derek swallowed hard. He looked down at the stark white sheets. I was packing a bag. He caught me. He caught you because you hesitated, Sebastian said. You waited until he was at work, but you took too long organizing your things. You wanted to leave, but you were still afraid of making a mess. Derek's head snapped up. How do you know that? Because it is the pathology of the abused, Sebastian replied smoothly. You try to mitigate the damage even while you are fleeing. You try to fold the clothes neatly before you run out the door. It is a fatal flaw. Derek felt a hot flush of anger burn through the narcotic haze. Who the hell do you think you are to psychoanalyze me? You break into my apartment, torture my boyfriend, drag me here, and put metal in my leg without my consent. Consent? Sebastian cut him off, the word sharp, cracking like a whip in the quiet room. You texted a stranger begging for help. You provided your address. I provided the medical intervention required to keep your leg. If I had left you there, the bone would have necrotized. You would have lost the limb from the knee down. Or Marcus would have panicked when the swelling cut off your circulation, and he would have strangled you to keep you quiet. He leaned forward slightly, the movement predatory. I did not ask for your permission to save your life, Derek, because you were in no position to grant it. Derek glared at him, his chest heaving. He wanted to yell. He wanted to throw something at Sebastian's perfectly composed face. But the fire went out as quickly as it sparked. He was exhausted. He was broken. And he knew with terrifying certainty, that Sebastian was absolutely right. What happened to him? Derek whispered. Sebastian held his gaze. Marcus is no longer a concern of yours. Did you kill him? I don't waste bullets on domestic cowards, Sebastian said. He is currently residing in a basement in the industrial district. He has 2 shattered kneecaps. Samson is ensuring he receives the exact level of medical care he offered you, which is to say, none. Derek felt a sickening jolt in his stomach. It was a cocktail of absolute horror and a dark, twisted sense of vindication. He hated himself for the latter. You're a monster, he breathed. Sebastian didn't flinch. He just stood up, smoothing the front of his sweater. Monsters hide under the bed, Derek. I stand right in front of you. He walked toward the door. Miller will be back with your antibiotics in 2 hours. Tomorrow, we start making you useful. The next 3 days were a masterclass in controlled agony. The morphine was tapered off, replaced by lesser painkillers that did absolutely nothing to dull the deep, grinding ache in Derek's shin. The titanium rod felt like a block of ice buried deep inside his marrow. He learned the geography of his cage. It was a massive suite, a private bathroom equipped with a walk-in shower and grab bars, a closet stocked with soft, neutral-colored loungewear that fit him perfectly. There were no locks on the inside of the doors, but he quickly discovered there were none on the outside either. On the 4th day, Dr. Miller arrived with a set of aluminum crutches. Up, Miller ordered, tossing the crutches onto the bed. Derek stared at them. I can barely sit up without passing out. Mr. Kane has requested your presence in the dining room for lunch. I suggest you figure it out. Miller checked his watch. You have 20 minutes. He left. Derek sat on the edge of the bed. His right leg hung heavily, the cast pulling at his hip joint. He was sweating just from the effort of sitting upright. He looked at the crutches. I want to see what happens when you finally stop bleeding on the floor. Sebastian's words echoed in his skull. It wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. Gritting his teeth, Derek grabbed the crutches. Getting them positioned under his arms was a clumsy, humiliating process. The moment he put weight on his good leg and hoisted himself up, the blood rushed downward into his broken leg. The pressure against the surgical incisions was blinding. He bit back a scream, swaying violently. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the nausea to pass. One step. Then another. By the time he reached the heavy oak door, his hospital gown was clinging to his sweat-slicked back. He opened the door. A man in a dark suit was standing in the hallway. He wasn't Samson, he was younger, with a jagged scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He looked at Derek, entirely unimpressed, and gestured down the corridor. Follow the hall to the stairs. There's an elevator to your left, he said flatly. Derek didn't reply. He just started walking. The estate was massive, a sprawling brutalist structure of exposed concrete, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling glass that overlooked a dense pine forest. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a fortress designed by someone who hated sunlight. He found the dining room. It was austere, dominated by a long, live-edge walnut table. Sebastian sat at the far end, a laptop open in front of him, typing rapidly. He didn't look up as Derek swung himself into the room, his crutches thudding against the hardwood floor. Sit, he said. Derek navigated to the nearest chair and collapsed into it. He let the crutches clatter to the floor. He was gasping for air, his leg throbbing in time with his racing heart. A man in a quiet gray uniform immediately stepped out from a side door, placing a plate of roasted chicken and vegetables in front of Derek, along with a glass of water. He vanished just as quickly. Sebastian closed the laptop. He looked at Derek's flushed face, the sweat on his brow. You took 24 minutes, Sebastian noted. Go to hell, Derek snapped, grabbing the glass of water and downing half of it in one gulp. Sebastian's mouth twitched. It was the closest thing to a smile Derek had seen on him, and it was entirely devoid of warmth. Your spirit is returning. Good. Eat. Derek picked up a fork. He was ravenous. The hospital food Miller had been feeding him was bland and utilitarian. This tasted incredible. He ate in silence for a few minutes before the reality of the situation forced him to speak. Why am I here? He asked, his mouth half full. And don't give me that saving you garbage. Men like you don't do charity. Sebastian cut a piece of steak on his own plate. His movements were precise. Surgical. Men like me, he repeated, tasting the phrase. And what kind of man am I, Derek? A criminal, Derek said bluntly. You have armed guards. You kidnapped a man. You operate a black market hospital wing. You're a mob boss or a cartel leader. I don't know the exact flavor of your sociopathy, but you aren't a good Samaritan. Sebastian chewed. Swallowed. Dabbed his mouth with a napkin. I am a businessman. My business operates outside the purview of local law enforcement because local law enforcement is inefficient and prone to bribery. I provide order by breaking people's wrists and kneecaps. By enforcing consequences. He counted smoothly. In my world, there is a ledger. Every action incurs a debt or a credit. Marcus accrued a massive debt by laying his hands on you. I collected. And what about me? Derek put his fork down, his appetite suddenly vanishing. What is my debt? Sebastian stared at him. His dark eyes locked onto Derek's, pinning him to the chair. You owe me a great deal, he said quietly. I financed your surgery. I am providing your housing, your security, and your rehabilitation. In the real world, you would be ruined financially. Here, you are merely in the red. Derek felt a cold sweat break out across his neck. I told you I don't have money. I have enough money to burn this city to the ground and build a new one on the ashes, Sebastian said dismissively. I don't want your cash. Then what do you want? Loyalty. The word hung in the air, heavy and loaded. I employ many people, Sebastian continued, leaning back in his chair. Soldiers. Smugglers. Accountants. But I have very few people I can trust to remain invisible. You are a ghost, Derek. You have no family tying you down, save for a brother you rarely speak to. You worked as a data entry clerk for a logistics firm. You are meticulous. You are observant. And right now, you are a blank slate. Derek's mind raced. He had done a background check on him. He knew about Evan. He knew about his job. You want me to work for you? I want you to manage my ledgers, Sebastian corrected. The real ones. The ones my accountants never see. The ones that track the movement of illicit goods. The payoffs. The bribes. You will catalog the rot of this city for me. And if I say no? Sebastian didn't blink. You are free to leave. Samson will drive you to the city limits and drop you off with a broken leg, no job, and a hospital bill you cannot afford. And you will eventually run into Marcus's friends, who are currently looking for the Omega they believe set him up. It wasn't a choice. It was an ultimatum wrapped in velvet. You're trapping me, Derek whispered. I am giving you a job, Sebastian stated. A very well-paying one. You will live here. You will heal. You will work. And when your debt is paid, which will take precisely 3 years at the salary I am offering, you may leave with enough capital to disappear anywhere in the world. 3 years. It felt like a lifetime. It felt like a prison sentence. But as Derek looked at the heavy fiberglass cast on his leg and thought about the linoleum floor of his apartment, he knew the truth. Sebastian Cain wasn't a savior. But he was offering Derek the one thing Marcus had systematically destroyed, leverage. Derek picked up his fork. He looked Sebastian dead in the eye. "I want a laptop," he said, his voice steady. "And I want physical therapy every single day. If I'm working for you, I'm not doing it from a bed." Sebastian watched him for a long moment. He nodded once. "Deal." Recovery was not a straight line. It was a jagged, brutal sawtooth graph of small victories and crushing defeats. The first month was entirely physical. Sebastian brought in a physiotherapist named Maggie, a stout, no-nonsense beta with forearms like a dock worker and a bedside manner that bordered on aggressive. "The bone is knitting," Maggie said on a rainy Tuesday, aggressively kneading the atrophied muscles of Derek's right thigh above the cast, "but the muscle is turning to jelly. If you don't fire these nerves, you're going to walk with a limp for the rest of your life." Derek gritted his teeth, staring at the ceiling of the private gym Sebastian had assigned to him. Sweat pooled on his chest and neck. "It hurts." "Pain is a neurological suggestion," Maggie grunted, pushing his thumb brutally into a trigger point. "Ignore it. Fire the quad now." Derek tried. He sent the signal from his brain to his leg. The muscle twitched, followed immediately by a sharp, stabbing pain near the titanium screws in his shin. He gasped, his head falling back against the mat. "Again," Maggie ordered. "I can't." "You can. You just don't want to." "I said I can't." Derek yelled, his voice echoing off the mirrored walls of the gym. Tears of sheer frustration pricked his eyes. He hated being weak. He hated that his body felt like a fragile, alien thing. "He said he can't, Maggie." Derek froze. He craned his neck backward. Sebastian was standing in the doorway of the gym, wearing a tailored navy suit today, a stark contrast to the sweatpants and tank top Derek was wearing. He walked into the room, his footsteps silent on the rubber matting. Maggie immediately stepped back, wiping his hands on a towel. "Mr. Cain. He's being difficult. Refuses to push past the threshold." Sebastian looked down at Derek. Derek wiped furiously at his eyes, hating that Sebastian was seeing him cry. He wasn't crying from fear, he was crying from absolute rage at his own limitations. "Get up," Sebastian said. Derek stared at him. "What?" "Get up, Derek. Walk to the door." "I can't put weight on it yet," Derek snapped. "Dr. Miller said." "Dr. Miller is a surgeon. He builds the scaffolding. Maggie builds the muscle. I build the intent." Sebastian walked over to the crutches leaning against the wall and kicked them out into the hallway. They clattered noisily against the hardwood. Derek's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "You have been here for 5 weeks, Sebastian said, turning back to him, his voice flat, devoid of sympathy. "You are managing my digital ledgers perfectly. You are organized. You are ruthless with the numbers. But physically, you are still acting like a victim waiting for the next blow. I have a titanium rod in my leg." Derek screamed at him. "Which makes the leg stronger than it was before," Sebastian shot back, stepping closer. He loomed over Derek, a dark shadow blocking out the overhead lights. "The rod will not break. The bone will not snap. The only thing stopping you is the memory of the floor in that cheap apartment." Derek breathed heavily, his chest heaving. The sheer audacity of this alpha standing in his expensive suit, lecturing him about pain. And beneath the anger, something else stirred. Sebastian's scent was stronger now, closer. Dark and warm and impossible to ignore. Derek's omega instincts were screaming at him, a confusing mix of fear and something else. Something he refused to name. "You don't know anything about it," Derek hissed. I know that Marcus broke your leg because you let him get close enough to do it, Sebastian said brutally. The words were a physical slap. You surrendered your space. You surrendered your agency. And you are doing it right now, on this mat. You are waiting for Maggie to fix you. You are waiting for me to allow you to stop. He leaned down, grabbing Derek by the left arm, and yanked him violently upright. Derek shrieked, hopping wildly on his good leg to keep his balance. The heavy cast on his right leg swung awkwardly. He grabbed Sebastian's lapels to keep from falling. The fabric of his suit was incredibly soft beneath Derek's white-knuckled grip. Sebastian didn't pull away. He stood perfectly still, letting Derek use him as a crutch. His chest was solid, unyielding stone beneath Derek's hands. And his scent, God, his scent, was everywhere, flooding Derek's senses. It was oppressive and intoxicating and absolutely terrifying. Let go of me, Derek choked out, his face inches from Sebastian's. He could smell him now, not just the alpha dominance, but something underneath. Bergamot and ozone and something sharp and metallic. No, Sebastian said. Stand on it. It will tear the incisions. The incisions are healed. The bone is set. Put your foot on the ground, Derek. Derek stared up into Sebastian's hollow dark eyes. There was no malice in them, just an absolute, terrifying certainty. He wasn't going to let Derek fall. But he wasn't going to carry him either. Trembling, Derek lowered his right leg. The heavy rubber sole of the walking cast touched the rubber matting. Wait, Sebastian commanded. Derek shifted an inch of his body weight onto the right leg. A dull, protesting ache radiated up his shin, wrapping around his knee. He whimpered, instinctively trying to pull the leg back up. Sebastian's hands shot out, wrapping around Derek's waist. His grip was iron. He held him firmly in place. Do not retreat, he whispered, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, dangerous register. You never retreat again. Push through the floor. Derek closed his eyes. He focused on the anger at Marcus, the anger at his own helplessness, the anger at Sebastian for forcing him into this crucible. He funneled all of it downward. He pressed his foot firmly onto the floor. The pain flared, bright and hot, a warning siren in his brain. But beneath the pain, there was something else. Resistance. The titanium rod held. The bone held. He was standing. He opened his eyes. He was still gripping Sebastian's lapels, but his weight was evenly distributed. He was breathing heavily, sweat stinging his eyes, but he wasn't falling. Sebastian looked down at him. His hand slowly released Derek's waist, stepping back a single inch, just enough to let Derek stand entirely on his own. The pain is just information, Sebastian said quietly. It tells you where the boundaries are. It is up to you to push them outward. He turned and walked toward the door. He stopped at the threshold, glancing back over his shoulder. Your numbers on the west side docks were off by a margin of 3%, he added, his tone snapping instantly back to business. Find the discrepancy before dinner. Or I will deduct the missing capital from your salary. He walked out, leaving Derek standing alone in the center of the gym. Derek stood there for a long moment, the ache in his leg throbbing in time with his pulse. He looked at Maggie, who was watching him with a quiet, approving smirk. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at the door Sebastian had just walked through. Maggie, Derek said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the tremble of fear. Yeah. Show me how to fire the quad again. The cast came off in November. It was replaced by a sleek black carbon fiber cane. Derek hated it. He hated the sharp click it made against the hardwood floors of the estate, a constant, acoustic reminder of his deficit. But he used it. He walked the perimeter of his gilded cage. He walked the long hallways. And he walked into Sebastian's office. It was a Tuesday evening. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows behind Sebastian's heavy oak desk. Sebastian was on the phone, his voice a low, dangerous murmur. He held up a single finger as Derek entered. Derek didn't wait by the door. He crossed the room, the cane clicking rhythmically, and dropped a leather-bound folder onto the center of the desk. Sebastian finished the call, hanging up the receiver without breaking eye contact with Derek. "I found your 3%, Derek said flatly. He opened the folder, spinning it around so the spreadsheet faced Sebastian. He tapped a column of numbers with a manicured fingernail. "The West Side docks operate on a cash-heavy rotation. Your manifest shows incoming shipping containers billed at a standard tariff. But the fuel surcharge is fluctuating. It shouldn't. Fuel prices have been static for 6 months. Someone is padding the fuel invoices by 3% and skimming the difference before it reaches the central account." Sebastian looked at the spreadsheet. He traced the line of numbers. "Who?" "Your logistics manager. Mitchell." Sebastian closed the folder. He leaned back in his leather chair. He didn't look angry. He looked intrigued. "You are certain?" "Numbers do not lie, Sebastian. People do." It was the first time Derek had used his first name without a sneer. The shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate. The air thickened. Sebastian's scent, that dark, warm, oppressive presence, intensified. Derek felt his own omega instincts stir in response, a flush of heat creeping up the back of his neck. Sebastian hit a button on his intercom. "Samson. Bring Mitchell to the study." "You're going to break his legs," Derek stated. It wasn't a question. "Embezzlement is a breach of contract," Sebastian replied evenly. "I provide a lucrative wage in exchange for absolute loyalty." Mitchell broke the terms. He took from the collective. "So you maim him." "I reset the ledger," Sebastian corrected. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "You can leave now, Derek. The administrative part of this transaction is over." Derek gripped the handle of his cane. His knuckles turned white. 3 months ago, he would have fled to his room, pressing his hands over his ears to block out the sounds of violence. He would have hid. "No," Derek said. Sebastian paused. He looked at Derek, his head tilted a fraction of an inch. "No. I found the error." "I built the case," Derek said, his voice remarkably steady. "I want to see the audit." Sebastian stared at him for a long, silent moment. The hollow look in his eyes receded, replaced by something entirely different. It looked a lot like respect. "Very well." 10 minutes later, Mitchell was dragged into the room. He was a weaselly beta in a cheap suit, sweating profusely. Samson threw him to the floor. Mitchell scrambled to his knees, his eyes darting frantically between Samson and Sebastian. Then he noticed Derek standing quietly by the bookshelf, leaning on a cane. "Mr. Kane, I swear I don't know why I'm here," Mitchell stammered. Sebastian walked around his desk. He picked up the leather folder Derek had prepared and dropped it onto the floor in front of Mitchell. The heavy thud made the man flinch. "Fuel surcharges, Mitchell," Sebastian said quietly. 3% over 6 months. It amounts to $80,000. Mitchell's face drained of color. "It was a clerical error, the software." "The software is infallible because Mr. Derek manages it," Sebastian interrupted. His voice dropped to a terrifying whisper. "He doesn't make errors. You do." Sebastian looked at Samson and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Samson stepped forward. He didn't pull a weapon. He just grabbed Mitchell's right hand and slammed it flat onto the heavy oak desk. Mitchell began to scream before Samson even raised the heavy, solid brass paperweight. The sickening crunch of bone breaking echoed in the study. Mitchell collapsed, shrieking in agony, cradling his mangled hand against his chest. Derek didn't look away. His heart hammered against his ribs, bile rising in his throat. But he forced his eyes to stay open. He watched Mitchell writhe. He watched the consequence. It was brutal. It was primitive. And it was perfectly balanced. Sebastian stepped over Mitchell, stopping directly in front of Derek. He searched his face, looking for the terrified Omega he had scraped off a linoleum floor. Derek wasn't there anymore. "Does the math satisfy you?" Sebastian asked quietly, over Mitchell's sobbing. Derek looked down at the embezzler, then back up to the alpha who commanded the violence. "The ledger is closed," Derek said. A year changed the architecture of Derek's survival. The cane was relegated to the back of his closet, used only on damp mornings when the titanium rod ached deep in the marrow. He wore tailored trousers and silk button-downs, his hair cropped short and neat. He was no longer just the Omega in the guest room. He was the central nervous system of Sebastian's empire. He controlled the flow of capital. He dictated the laundering protocols. When the lieutenants came to the estate for meetings, they didn't look at him with pity. They looked at him with wariness. Because Derek knew precisely how much they were worth, and how quickly they could be zeroed out. Sebastian rarely touched him. Their intimacy was not built on physical affection. It was built on a terrifying, symbiotic trust. Sebastian spent hours in the study late at night, dissecting territory maps and financial reports, fueled by black coffee and the quiet hum of shared ambition. And Derek was always there, beside him, the numbers dancing behind his eyes. But there were moments. Small, electric moments that Derek refused to acknowledge. A brush of fingers when Sebastian handed him a file. A lingering gaze across the dinner table. The way Sebastian's scent would spike, just slightly, when Derek walked into a room. The way Derek's own Omega instincts would purr in response, a treacherous warmth spreading through his chest. He told himself it was nothing. Survival instinct, nothing more. He was just adapting to his environment. Then the night the perimeter fell. It was 2 a.m. Derek was in his suite, reviewing a wire transfer from a shell company in the Caymans, when the power grid died. The estate plunged into total darkness. Derek froze. The quiet hum of the HVAC system stopped. A second later, the backup generators kicked in, bathing the hallways in a sickly red emergency light. Then came the gunfire. It was distant at first, a sharp staccato popping down by the main gate. But it rapidly escalated into a deafening roar, echoing through the valley. This wasn't a warning. It was an assault. Derek didn't panic. Panic was for victims. He shoved away from his desk, grabbed the heavy Glock 19 Sebastian had insisted he learn to shoot, and moved into the hallway. The air smelled of ozone and cordite. Men were shouting downstairs. He recognized Samson's deep bellow, followed immediately by the shattering of the massive glass windows in the foyer. Derek! Sebastian materialized from the shadows near the stairwell. He wore black tactical gear over his clothes, a suppressed rifle strapped to his chest. His eyes were wide, the calm veneer completely shattered. "Rival syndicate," Sebastian said, grabbing Derek's arm and pulling him toward the opposite end of the hall. "The Colombians. They bought off the local police precinct. We are entirely on our own. We need to reach the bunker." "What about the ledger?" Derek demanded, his mind instantly going to the physical hard drives in the study. "Forget the drives. I need you breathing." Sebastian snarled, shoving Derek ahead of him. They reached the end of the corridor, a heavy steel door leading to the private elevator that descended into the reinforced basement. Sebastian punched a code into the keypad. The light blinked green. Before the door could open, the stairwell door behind them burst off its hinges. 3 men in tactical gear spilled into the corridor, raising automatic weapons. "Down!" Sebastian roared, tackling Derek to the floor. The air above them exploded in a hail of bullets, shredding the drywall and shattering the light fixtures. Sebastian rolled, bringing his rifle up, and fired 3 suppressed, precise shots. 2 of the men dropped instantly, their body armor useless against armor-piercing rounds. The 3rd man dove behind a marble pillar, returning fire blindly. Derek pressed his face into the carpet. The ringing in his ears was absolute agony. He heard a sharp, wet thud, followed by Sebastian's sharp intake of breath. The return fire stopped. Samson had flanked the 3rd man from the stairwell. A single shot ended the immediate threat. Derek scrambled to his feet. His right leg screamed in protest at the sudden violence. He looked down. Sebastian was on his knees, leaning heavily against the wall, a dark spreading stain. The bullet had ruined the black fabric of his tactical vest just below the collarbone. He was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. "Sebastian!" Derek choked, dropping beside him. He pressed his hands over the wound. The blood was hot and thick, spilling over his fingers. "Elevator," Sebastian grunted, his head lolling against the wall. He was losing blood too fast. The shock was setting in. Derek looked at the open elevator doors. It was 10 feet away. Sebastian weighed over 200 pounds of dead weight. "Samson!" Derek screamed. "Holding the stairs!" Samson yelled back, the sound of fresh gunfire erupting from the floor below. "Get him down!" Derek grabbed Sebastian by the straps of his vest. He hauled upward, screaming with the effort. His right leg, the one Marcus had shattered, took the brunt of the burden. The titanium rod vibrated with the strain. The pain was blinding, a white-hot spike driving straight into his brain. "The pain is just information. Get up!" Derek hissed, his face inches from Sebastian's. "You do not get to die on my floor. Get up!" He yanked Sebastian to his feet. Sebastian leaned his entire bulk onto Derek's left shoulder. Derek braced his right foot against the carpet, pushing off. Step. Drag. Step. Drag. They stumbled into the elevator just as a new wave of men breached the hallway. Bullets sparked off the closing steel doors. Derek hit the basement button, his hand smeared with Sebastian's blood. The elevator dropped. Sebastian slid down the wall, coughing violently. Blood splattered against the stainless steel paneling. He looked up at Derek, his eyes losing focus. "You didn't hesitate," he whispered, a weak, bloody smile ghosting across his face. "You didn't fold the clothes." "Shut up," Derek cried, tearing the silk scarf from his neck and pressing it into the bullet hole. "Keep your eyes on me. Don't look away." "The ledger," Sebastian mumbled, his head dropping back. "I balance the ledger," Derek said fiercely, pressing his forehead against Sebastian's. "And you owe me. You hear me? You are in the red, Sebastian. You don't get to check out until the debt is paid." The elevator stopped. The doors opened into the cold, sterile sanctuary of the bunker. Derek dragged him into the light. 3 days later. The bunker smelled intensely of bleach and iodine. Derek sat in a metal folding chair beside a medical cot. He hadn't slept for more than 40 minutes at a time. He wore the same blood-stained silk shirt, the fabric stiff and ruined. Dr. Miller had been in the bunker when the assault started. He had spent 4 hours digging a fragmented .5.56 round out of Sebastian's chest cavity, millimeters from his subclavian artery. The estate above was quiet. The Colombians had been repelled by reinforcements called in by Samson. The cleanup was ongoing, a silent, methodical erasure of bodies and blood. On the cot, Sebastian shifted. His breathing hitched, then steadied. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The harsh fluorescent light of the bunker made him wince. He turned his head, finding Derek instantly. He didn't look like a mob boss right now, stripped to the waist, covered in bandages, pale and sweating. He looked incredibly human. "You look terrible," Sebastian rasped, his voice raw. Derek didn't smile, but the crushing weight on his chest finally fractured, letting in a single sliver of air. "You bled on my good shoes," he replied softly. He poured a cup of water from a plastic pitcher and held the straw to Sebastian's lips. Sebastian drank greedily, leaning his head back against the thin pillow. He studied Derek's face, the dark circles under his eyes, the dried blood on his collar, the absolute rigidity of his posture. "My leg hurts," Derek said quietly, answering the question Sebastian hadn't asked. "I put too much weight on it dragging you." "But it didn't break." "Titanium," Sebastian murmured. "Yes." Derek set the cup down. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands together. "Dr. Miller says you need 6 weeks of rest. You tore a muscle, and the blood loss was severe. You are confined to this bed. And then a wheelchair." Sebastian grimaced, attempting to sit up before the pain forced him back down with a sharp hiss. "Business is running," Derek interrupted smoothly. "Samson is managing the perimeter and the retaliation. I am managing the accounts. I rerouted the Cayman's transfer to a blind trust to secure the liquid assets while the house was compromised. The Colombians got nothing but bullets." Sebastian stared at him. The silence stretched between them, heavy and profound. "You took control of the entire network," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an acknowledgement. "Someone had to balance the ledger while you were unconscious," Derek replied, his tone perfectly even. Sebastian reached out. His hand was trembling slightly, a rare physical weakness. He bypassed Derek's hand and grasped his wrist, his thumb brushing against his pulse point. "The 3 years are up," he said quietly. Derek frowned. "I've been here 14 months. You saved my life." "The debt is nullified," Sebastian stated, his voice regaining a fraction of its usual commanding timbre. "Your account is clear, Derek. The severance package we discussed is in a secure account. You have enough capital to vanish. You don't have to live in a bunker. You don't have to watch men get their hands broken." He released Derek's wrist. He let his arm fall back onto the bed. "You are free to leave." Derek looked at his wrist, where Sebastian's skin had burned against his. He thought about the linoleum floor. He thought about Marcus's pathetic, manufactured guilt. He thought about the small, terrified Omega who had texted a wrong number, hoping for a savior to pull him out of the mud. That Omega was dead. Sebastian had burned him away, leaving only the metal behind. Derek stood up. The carbon fiber cane was resting against the wall. He didn't pick it up. He didn't need it today. He walked over to the small steel table at the end of the room and picked up a thick leather-bound folder. He walked back to the bed and dropped it directly onto Sebastian's lap, right over the white bandages. "The western ports are still short," Derek said, his voice dropping to a cool clinical register. "And Samson's ammunition expenditures from last night need to be categorized properly before the end of the quarter. We are bleeding cash on tactical gear." Sebastian looked at the folder. He looked up at Derek. The hollow darkness in his eyes was entirely gone, replaced by a fierce, undeniable possession. "You aren't leaving," he stated. "No," Derek agreed. He leaned down, resting his hands on either side of Sebastian's shoulders, bringing his face inches from his. He could smell him, bergamot and ozone and that sharp metallic edge. Sebastian's alpha scent was flooding the room, raw and unrestrained. And Derek's own omega instincts were responding, a low thrum of heat and want coiling in his gut. His scent, usually so carefully controlled, was spiking with something that tasted like surrender and defiance all at once. The gland at the curve of his neck throbbed, a dull, insistent pulse that he couldn't ignore. I built this architecture. I own the numbers. And I don't surrender my space to anyone anymore, Derek said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Not even you. Sebastian's jaw tightened. A dark, genuine smile finally broke across his face. He reached up, his hand tangling in Derek's hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him down the final inch until their lips brushed. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of gravity, a sealing of a violent, unbreakable contract. And when Sebastian's tongue swept against Derek's lower lip, Derek felt the alpha's canines graze his mouth, a sharp reminder of exactly what Sebastian was. The alpha's scent intensified, wrapping around Derek like a physical weight, and Derek's omega instinct screamed in response, a raw, primal demand that made his knees threaten to buckle. Mark me. The thought was irrational, instinctive, utterly omega. Derek shoved it down, but the heat in his gut only burned hotter. Good, Sebastian breathed against his mouth. Because I was never going to let you walk out that door anyway. Derek pulled back, smoothing the front of his ruined silk shirt. He could still taste Sebastian's scent on his tongue, bergamot and ozone and something darker, something that made his pulse race. I know, he said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. He pulled the metal folding chair closer and sat back down. Now. Look at page 4. We have a problem in the warehouse district. 3 years later, Derek stood in the center of the estate's command room, a vast, windowless space lined with monitors and servers that hummed with the quiet heartbeat of Sebastian's empire. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his hair cropped short, his posture immaculate. The titanium rod in his leg ached on damp mornings, a dull, familiar throb that reminded him of where he had started. Sebastian was at the head of the table, surrounded by lieutenants. His scent, bergamot and ozone, that sharp metallic edge, filled the room, a constant, comforting presence that Derek had long since stopped pretending to ignore. He smelled it now, beneath the gun oil and the stale coffee, and his omega instincts hummed in quiet satisfaction. They had never discussed the mark. They had never needed to. The bond was there, woven through every file they reviewed, every enemy they dismantled, every night Derek fell asleep in Sebastian's bed and woke in his arms. Sebastian's teeth had found the gland at Derek's throat on a night of gunpowder and survival, and Derek had let him. Had begged him, in the privacy of his own head. The mark was a scar now, a pale ring of tissue that no one else saw but that Derek touched in the shower each morning, a reminder that he was no longer alone. You were right about the warehouse, Sebastian said, dismissing the lieutenants with a nod. The room emptied, leaving only the two of them. Mitchell's replacement was skimming again. I had Samson handle it. Derek didn't flinch. Violence had become as ordinary as breathing. The quarterly reports are on your desk. Sebastian crossed the room, stopping inches from Derek. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of Derek's jaw. His scent spiked, warm and possessive, and Derek felt the answering surge of heat in his own veins. The omega gland at his neck throbbed, a dull pulse that matched the rhythm of his heart. You never cease to amaze me, Sebastian murmured. Flattery won't get you out of reviewing the ammunition expenditures, Derek replied, but his voice had gone rough, his omega instincts purring at the proximity. Sebastian laughed, a low, rare sound, and pulled Derek into a kiss that was all teeth and possession. His canines scraped against Derek's lower lip, drawing a bead of blood. The metallic taste flooded Derek's mouth, and he groaned, pressing closer. His fingers found Sebastian's waist, gripping the fabric of his jacket, pulling him in. Later, Sebastian said, pulling back just enough to meet Derek's eyes. His pupils were blown wide, his scent thick and demanding. Right now, I believe you have a discrepancy to find in the West Side docks. Derek smiled, a sharp, dangerous thing that would have horrified the Omega he had been 3 years ago. Already found it. I just wanted to hear you admit I was right. Sebastian's eyes darkened. Insufferable. I learned from the best. They worked in silence after that, side by side, the hum of the monitors filling the room. And when Derek's hand brushed Sebastian's across the table, the Alpha's fingers curled around his wrist, holding him in place. His thumb pressed against Derek's pulse point, feeling the steady, strong rhythm of his heartbeat. Not as a prisoner. As an equal. The story of Derek and Sebastian wasn't a fairy tale. It was a ledger, debts and credits, violence and consequence, blood and titanium and the slow, grinding work of rebuilding a life from broken pieces. Derek had started on a linoleum floor, bleeding out his last shred of hope. He had ended up in a fortress, holding the reins of an empire. He hadn't just paid his debt. He had rewritten the entire ledger. And somewhere, in the quiet hours between gunfire and balance sheets, he had found something he never expected, an Alpha who didn't want to break him, but to build him stronger. A bond that wasn't about submission, but about trust. A love that was forged in fire and sealed in blood. The Omega who had texted a wrong number, hoping for a miracle, had gotten something far more dangerous, a monster who taught him to become one too. And Derek wouldn't have had it any other way. The end.